It is Friday, August 4th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another reliable episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The August PS Plus Essential Games are live on PSN now, so make sure you claim those, get that done so you don't forget. And for our first story, let's talk about the new PS5 System Software Update Beta, where the invites got sent out on Monday, which means based on that timing, we're probably not going to see this firmware go live for everyone until around early mid-September, somewhere around there. But we did already talk about this for our Tuesday video, so if you missed that, then here's a very quick, brief recap on what's coming up in this next major firmware. Dolby Atmos support for one, finally on PS5, which we can say the senior sound design supervisor at PlayStation did confirm already that there is going to be an automatic Atmos mix applied for 3D audio games. So there is some kind of retroactive support immediately, but for a more targeted, optimized Atmos mix, studios can now support this by either sending out a patch or just using it right away and shipping games with this feature. So good to see that's finally here. And there's also haptic feedback for navigating the UI, so you can toggle that on or off in settings. Also under accessibility settings, there's now a second controller option for additional assistance. And then there's share screen preview windows for anyone sharing their screen in a joinable party. There's join game buttons that now appear in the friends list if they're in an activity you can join. You can also invite groups of players to closed or open parties instead of just individual players. Then there's a Game Hub Tournaments tile now that can appear for games that support tournaments, so nice little easy way to access that. You can also react to messages with emojis. You can search for games in your library. The activity cards now have a more enlarged window showing you the details of that activity without having to click in. You can manually explore tips in system settings. M.2 drives now support up to 8 terabytes, and then you can also adjust or turn off the PS5's infamous beep sound. And that is the one thing in there that caught my eye immediately, and I was like, oh my god, we have to talk about this. They're actually, after nearly 17 years, doing something with this beep sound, which I just found really funny. It's almost like they're breaking a PlayStation tradition, even though you don't have to turn it off, obviously. It's a setting now, so you can adjust the volume, or you can just turn it off if you want to not have that sound incriminate you by letting your whole family know that you're now playing your console. But I just found that funny that, that's probably one of the number one things I would think they would never touch at all when you've got people asking for themes or folders, things like that, right? So, and I'm sure those things can still come at some point, but if anything, that just means, it's going to be a bit longer until they come, because this is not really a massive update, I would say, but it does seem like if Sony sticks to this, 3-4 month timeline of when they usually ship, I guess, larger firmware updates, that just means that based on this one, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer, potentially, for those features to finally come. But for now, at least, this is what we have. Next up, we have a very unfortunate 2020-esque situation. The Spider-Man 2 PS5 accessories are getting scalped. Now, it does depend on what you're looking for. So the bundle is definitely still in stock, because that's, pretty steep at $600, but it has the console, covers, controller, the game. You can still order that. You can also still pre-order a DualSense as well. So there are sold listings on eBay for that controller, which is well over MSRP, obviously, but you can still order the controller for now as well. What really is problematic is the console covers. So either the company did not make a lot of these, or there really is that much demand. I don't know, but it seems like they're not going to make any more. Maybe if there's enough shouting and demand, maybe they will. But for now, it seems like you're pretty much out of luck. So you'll have to really hound those websites and see if there is a restock coming. Or, follow Wario64 on formerly Twitter and turn on notifications. They might be able to inform you if there's a restock. I will say, if you're a digital edition owner, this is going to be really tough, because much like the consoles themselves, where that's typically an 80-20 split in terms of the general inventory and what they sell, that surely extends to something like the covers. So that means when covers go back in stock, if there is the digital edition one, that there's not going to be many of those to go around. So just also bear that in mind. But it's unfortunate. It just seems like no matter what, if there's any kind of in-demand product, we are always going to find ourselves in this situation. Now, while we're talking about accessories, good segue to our next story, which is about the PlayStation wireless earbuds, the ones they announced during the last major PlayStation showcase next to the Project Q. And based on FCC listings that were spotted by My Smart Price Online, we know a little bit more about these, assuming it is the same listing where they're being labeled as wireless noise canceling gaming headset, so it should have noise canceling as a feature. But based on the certification for the earbuds and the USB receiver, we can see that this should support Bluetooth's LE audio standard using Sony's proprietary LDAC codec, and it will also work for PS5, PC, and the Project Q, which that is the sort of utility to these, right? So at this point, Sony's got a range of options for you to choose from when it comes to, audio on PS5 and other devices. So not only the standard Sony group headsets that are not at all PS5 branded, and they don't even work on PS5 unless you buy a third-party receiver, but there's those. There's the Pulse headset, which very much is more of a PlayStation product for PS5 and PC. Then there's the InZone, which is more of a, more targeted towards both audiences, PC and PS5, where the USB receiver is meant for PlayStation 5, and then you can use Bluetooth with your PC, but these would be also great for handheld devices, right? So the Project Q certainly makes sense there, and you would assume smartphones as well. These should be really low latency, and it is Sony's proprietary codec, and I'm not really an audio guy, so I've seen that there's like debate on if it's really lossless audio quality or not, which Sony is going to say it is. That's not really for me to say, but still, that's what we know so far, and it shouldn't be too long until we get confirmed details if they plan to launch this thing later this year anyway. So in terms of the pricing and release, we should be hearing some more info in the coming months for this and Project Q. Now, something very cool that happened recently that is admittedly more of a Microsoft news story than Sony, but I do wish Sony would do this, is that Microsoft has launched a repair program website for their controllers where you can buy replacement parts and also get text and video guides showing you how to replace those parts as well. Now, it is only for the controllers, so the standard series controller and the Elite Series 2, but they are genuine OEM replacement buttons, top shells, and the PCBs for those controllers direct from Microsoft with a warranty, and that's super cool, and it's also a very small step in the right direction. Sony does not do this. Nintendo also does not do this, although they do have a store that at the bare minimum offers the kind of parts that are not like they can easily be misplaced or maybe they go bad. So OEM batteries or the back cover for the Switch dock, AC adapters, things like that. They'll sell that stuff to you, which is fine, obviously. They do also sell OEM game cases, which I really wish Sony would do that. But the point is, it's something Nintendo and Sony, generally speaking, they're not offering this. And I'm not sure how many people follow this, this topic, the right to repair topic, or somebody like Louis Rossmann. But in the last 10 years, more so, we've seen, not only game consoles, but phones, tablets, laptops, even things like appliances become less and less user replaceable, not just by way of them not offering schematics or genuine parts, but even on a software level, a lot of these things are pretty locked down. So even when you've got a genuine donor device where you can pull things off the board or something, and you're using the real parts, they still won't boot or load properly. And so it's just been a really grim area for a long time now. And that's why, right to repair is an important topic that in many ways we need legislation to get this stuff done. And, when it comes to, there's a lot to be said for the repairability of Series X and PS5 with those soldered on SSDs, and that's a wear item, so there's those are going to be a problem down the road, right? It's already something where if they have to be replaced, it's a big repair that oftentimes it becomes a roadblock. But either way, having some kind of power be given back to the consumer with offering replacement parts, it goes a long way, not just for on-the-ground consumers, but also independent repair shops as well. So while I don't expect Sony to do this unless they absolutely have to, because there is that one hearing in the EU about having replaceable batteries be in all sort of, handheld devices, which that the language surrounding that means a lot of companies are already compliant. It's not necessarily about having these easy poppable trays off the back of the device where you can pop in another battery. Not even so much that, which I saw a lot of places report it like that's what we're getting. But, it does take that kind of legislation to see that stuff happen in the first place, right? So I would hope that Sony eventually offers something where they can put some, replacement parts and some guides up for the DualSense, the PS5 console, things like that. I think it would be nice. Now let's move on to some game news here, starting with Helldivers 2, the PlayStation Studios game from Arrowhead, which might be coming out this October, if this insider gaming report is to be believed, where an anonymous source sent in a Sony partnership program briefing, which says flat out that the game is launching this October. Now, it does not give an exact date, but Tom does speculate that maybe Sony made a mistake here by outlining when this game is going to release, and it does say October. And this does come at a time where the game got an ESRB rating. It's rated M, just to let you know, big surprise there. But what does seem alarming is that October would place this right next to Spider-Man 2. Now, this is not too surprising to me, if only because it's not actually uncharacteristic of Sony to do something like this, which is they tend to just launch games when they're ready. You know what I mean? So if they've got some kind of internal target for this game being, ready to release by October, then they will seemingly do it. We've seen them before where they don't really care if the game is in close proximity to other major releases or their own major releases. They will ship 2 big games back to back if that is where the timing falls. I would agree that it would maybe make more sense to release the game in September if it can be released that soon, or really November would probably be better than October. But it wouldn't really be a non-Sony move to do something like that. But for now, that is what we're hearing, October. Next up, we have some candid words from Media Molecule about the closure of Dreams content support, where, as we already know, this coming September, that's pretty much it for Dreams. New content updates, new creation tools. They're, still going to keep the servers up, obviously, but they're going to be moving on to a new project. And this comes right as Dreams is launching into PS Plus, and Trend, their last original game made within Dreams, launching as well. And so this is where we heard from Siobhan Reddy, the Media Molecule studio director, speaking with Push Square. She says, and I quote here, "We're obviously really, really proud of Dreams, and I think Trend being the release we're making next is the thing that's been very galvanizing for the studio to kind of come together around that, because we are really proud of it. We just sadly couldn't find a sustainable path for it. It doesn't mean we don't love it. It doesn't mean we're not super proud of it and that we have been blown away by what everybody has created and are still creating. It's complicated because we are very, very proud of this beautiful thing that we made, but when we sat down and had a look at what we needed to do as a studio, we just couldn't find that sustainable path, so we had to make that decision." Now, I did just call that a candid answer, and certainly to a degree it is, but I do find that maybe they're putting it a bit light in terms of the real reality of the situation, which is, surely they were always looking for a sustainable path for a long time now, when Dreams was pitched as this, very powerful creation tool where, you can make these large-scale games that can at times be unrecognizable from being made within Dreams. And, nowadays you've got multi-person teams that make content within Dreams. And so at a certain point, maybe it was being humored that you could publish content outside of Dreams on the PlayStation Store, and that's where the game can be monetized further with this revenue sharing for creators. And there's, again, it was kind of a big picture thing, and we can all see where they were maybe trying to take this thing, but they just didn't really find that big audience. And, it got to a certain point where, you got to figure they were certainly aware of them running on borrowed time. And it being more a matter of Sony finally stepping in and having a very frank discussion with Media Molecule about how, hey, you got to move on. Or maybe it was a very easy conversation given the context, which is Sony finally showing up at some point during a standard portfolio review, which we imagine was very recent, and them saying you got to move on, and Media Molecule probably not even opposing that and going, yeah, you're right, we got to move on. It is a shame too, because Dreams is a very beautiful thing. A lot of talented people made some incredible stuff, not just those at Media Molecule that made Dreams as a tool, but those that published on Dreams. There's just a swath of amazing stuff that came out of that, but it would probably be better served for that talented studio to move on to something else. So I am excited to see what they are going to do after this. Next up, the Patapon spiritual successor, Ratatan, has been successfully funded on Kickstarter. Not just the minimum price they set, which that was met in like an hour when the Kickstarter went live. They crushed that right away. But days later, they're already at like $600,000 when I last checked. And I could have sworn it was actually at like $800,000. But whatever the amount is, they've already reached the stretch goal of console versions. So PlayStation 5 will get this game, also Switch and Series X, which is great. And they put out a gameplay trailer to actually show what the game is. It is straight up the most Patapon game out there, so very much that spiritual successor, which is not allowed to use the Patapon IP, but this is about as Patapon of a sequel as you're going to get, which is good. And what's funny is that the FAQ does mention in a very depressing answer for a possible physical release, they admit, and they say, and I quote here, "Standard retail release is becoming more and more challenging." What a shame, although that doesn't rule anything out. We can always have some kind of publishing company like Limited Run step in and do it, but either way, that is good to see. So Ratatan is successfully funded, and we could be seeing a Patapon spiritual successor on PlayStation at some point in the future. Moving on to our next news story, let's talk about PlayStation's 2023 China Joy presence in Shanghai, where they held a very small conference showing off a bunch of new titles from their China Hero project. This would be phase 3 of their incubation program, where they fund developers, and that often includes some timed console exclusivity. So most of these titles are PS5, PC, but they can also come to other platforms eventually. But we've seen a number of titles come out of the first 2 phases, and also a new one coming from India as well, but they showed off a lot of new titles. So first would be an existing game, Lost Soul Aside, which was announced a long time ago for PS4, and now this new trailer, it looks really good, but it's only announced for PS5 and PC, so it seems like they actually dropped PS4 entirely, which we're seeing a lot of games do nowadays. But new titles, The Godslayer for PS5. We only have screenshots, but it's an action RPG coming 2027, which is a bit funny that they even put some kind of release window on a game that far away. But this is from the same studio that did My Time at Porsche, which is such a different, this is not even close to what they used to do. They're actually shipping a sequel to that game fairly soon too, so My Time at Sandlot, I think it's called. But yeah, the Godslayer action RPG, that's coming a long time from now. There's also The Winds Rising. That's a story-driven action RPG from TI Games, the same studio that did Fist, Forged, and Shadow Torch. This did get a trailer, but we didn't really get to see too much. Next is Daba Land of Waterscar for PS5. That's also an action RPG. Looks very Souls-like from the trailer, and this is from the studio that shipped Sinner's Sacrifice for Redemption. So, and that game came out in 2018. I think they did a few other things as well. And then there's also Exilage from, this is a new studio called Enigmatrix, and this is going to be a third-person shooter, which that last title, so that's the only one that is a new studio from my understanding, because there has been this sentiment that, we're seeing all these games get announced from Chinese developers, and they all seem to be vaporware that they never come out, but that's not true, obviously. So that's why we just mentioned all those titles that did come out from these existing studios, and also from this particular program. Sony would not fund these developers if these were not real studios and real games that were probably gonna in good faith come out at some point. So a lot of really interesting stuff that are all PS5 timed exclusives. So we'll keep our eyes peeled, but there are a lot of talented studios out there, and that's the entire point of this program. Can't wait to see what comes from the India Hero project as well, so we'll definitely be watching these as these titles develop. Next up, we have more unsurprising news when it comes to PlayStation 5 success, I guess we could say. More interesting sales data to go over. So first up, Matt Piscatella from Circana, which tracks video game sales in the US. We learned that PS5 was the best-selling hardware in units and dollar sales for the month of June in the US, but this was actually the highest consumer spending on PlayStation hardware for the month of June since 2008. And also, unit sales were the highest since June 2010, so PlayStation breaking some 10-plus year records here for PlayStation sales history, even though it's so particular for the month of June, but still. Also, I guess more interesting is that the DualSense Edge is the best-selling accessory of the year in terms of dollar sales. Now, that is the caveat, dollar sales. It's a $200 controller, so that does add up. That implies that, you know, you have to sell at least 3 DualSense standard controllers to match the same price, but that does also imply that at least 1 in every 3 DualSense controllers being sold, where I guess the sort of very rough ratio here is that, you know, a very large portion of controllers that Sony sells are the DualSense Edge, which is quite impressive given that for the first 2-something years since PS5's been out, in terms of all the sales data, the DualSense is usually the #1 accessory that's always sold here in the US. So it seems like they're selling a lot of that premium controller. But it's the UK where we can see the price reduction make a huge impact recently. So what we saw recently from GamesIndustry.biz, which this comes from the GfK data, which tracks video game sales in the UK, standard PS5 console sales were up 205% in the UK last week. And if we account for all variations like the retailer bundles or the digital edition, then it's up 75%, which is still a lot, but it just shows that, you know, when you make the console a little bit more affordable, yeah, they're going to sell even more than they already were. But I mean, if I'm being honest, I feel like the DualSense Edge is the real surprise contender here because given the ratio that we have, it shows that they're selling a ton of that thing. And it very much is, you know, meant to be geared towards more of a niche audience that's willing to drop $200 on a single controller. But those are some big numbers for the Edge. We don't have exact numbers, but it shows that they're, I think, selling a lot more of those controllers than one would initially think. So maybe that bodes well for something like the Q Lite. I don't really know. I think that's maybe stretching it a bit. But yeah, the Edge is certainly selling a lot more than I think some gave it credit. So at this point, I think it would be fair to say that the Twisted Metal TV series on Peacock is doing a lot better than most would have thought, right? Now, I still haven't watched it. I'm probably not going to watch it, but I am seeing so many say, wow, it's actually a lot better than I thought. Some are saying it's amazing or they really love it. You know, it kind of varies between, yeah, it's okay to like, it's really good. I think a lot of it just plays into the low expectations, but, you know, either way, it's just something where we're hearing from the showrunner on the former Twitter website, Michael Jonathan. He did, quote, retweet somebody saying, and I quote here, "Unfortunately, we have no idea if Season 2 is happening, made all the more complicated with the strike, but I would love to do more, clearly." This, I think, certainly is a case of they don't really know. I mean, it's, you know, we saw with The Last of Us where it's like everyone involved was like, yeah, we don't know if it's happening. Oh, it was happening. It was confirmed like immediately. This, yeah, the strike is a problem. Everything's pretty much stuck right now. But I don't see why they wouldn't do a Season 2. Really falls down to, I guess, Peacock and if the show is really helping their financials, although I guess PlayStation Productions could shop the show around, I imagine. So based on the positive reception, though, so far, it seems like it should be not easy, but it seems like it would be. I would be surprised otherwise if it doesn't get a Season 2. Let's just put it that way. All right, so I guess we'll finally talk about this now that Sony seemingly has gotten involved, which is the Last of Us ripoff game that showed up on the Nintendo Switch eShop called The Last Hope. and it is very much a standard shovelware game. Doesn't look good, doesn't play good, but it's also unapologetically copying The Last of Us in many ways. Without shame. I'm sure a lot of you probably saw this. I actually had seen it a few days after this, I think, really blew up, right? And I was about to do a fun little video real quick on it, which I thought would have been funny, but didn't really have the time. But, you know, at that point, again, a lot of people found out about it because it was just so ridiculous, right? And so that was kind of fun, and it kind of blew over, and now it seems like Sony did do something about it. So the game is no longer on the eShop. Now we don't know why, but it's probably because of Sony, because when you look at the trailer for the game on YouTube, it was taken down by SIE. So it does seem like they finally put their foot down. I'm surprised it took them this long, but maybe it was something where Sony just kind of enjoyed the headspace this game was occupying. Like, okay, whatever, you're using our IP, you're copying it, whatever, but if you're talking about us and The Last of Us, then go ahead, generate all that SEO for us. And then by the time the game kind of, like, you know, in terms of the popularity of it, so to speak, fell off a cliff, then they took the game down. Maybe that's what they did. I don't know. That's more of a conspiracy theory on my part, but either way, I guess they finally did say, not on our watch, and the Sony ninjas came in very hot and heavy, which is not exactly surprising given that you're touching their property. But it was funny to see that game up for the time that it did, and if you did buy it in time, that means you always have it on your Switch, ready to play and enjoy for many years to come. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the news stories from this past week, and our Tuesday video was looking at that PS5 new system software update beta and the infamous PS5 console beep and its newfound uncertain fate in the hands of consumers. With all that drama aside, that's all I've got for you, so that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.